I was gonna say we had another poll that we talked about, and this was on the subject of the executive order to end birthright citizenship. We talked about the potential illegality of it, how this is a 14th Amendment issue, and there was a possible way that they were trying to get around this. So our question that we asked outright was, do you think the executive order ending birthright citizenship will be overturned by the courts? And the results were 57% said yes, 33% said no, 9% said I'm not sure. So most people think that the courts will overturn it.
Yeah. Now we have to be careful, I guess, with the phrasing of this. And I think when we asked it, we intended to ask, what will the ultimate resolution of this be? Because we know that courts, at least
Right.
one court I'm aware of, already stopped it, and we knew that was going to happen.
Yeah. There's like
Right.
22 states that have filed against this already.
Right. And I know of at least one federal court, right, that said it was unconstitutional and put a stop to
Right.
it. The question is, what's going to happen on appeal, right? When it
Right.
ultimately works its way up to the Supreme Court, what's going to happen then? And so
Right.
that's really what I want to know. And I just don't know if some people voting yes are voting yes because they think, well, some courts will overturn it, but how is it going to end up?
Right. Well, in the description, the write-up, I made sure to put in this idea that they could that I believe that this approach is intended to circumvent the 14th Amendment, to just change the interpretation, and so that they could end birthright citizenship without having to go through changing the amendment by doing this judicial interpretation. So I did make sure that information was in there. Um,
Right. But are they voting on whether it will be stopped ultimately or whether some courts might overturn it on the way up?
um, that I'm not specifically sure on. Um, so some person, one of the first comment here says, the wording of the amendment is fairly clear. I think it's a given that every court up to the Supreme Court would strike down the order, but who knows what the court, who knows what the current Supremes will make of it. So
The current Supremes, like Diana
yeah,
Ross?
that's what he put, the current Supremes. It's an interesting way of calling them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
It's
said
interesting
if
though
the
that
Supreme Court.
they have faith in every court in the land except for that one. That's pretty sad.
And I think a lot of people probably, have a similar feeling because we've seen this very biased Supreme Court that we've got now. And he ends his statement off by saying, if the Supreme Court would allow the president to ignore the Constitution in such a clear case, that's basically the end of constitutional governance in America.
Yeah, okay. Listen, I don't disagree with these comments, but I also have a feeling they're not written by lawyers. And okay, why would they be? It's a poll on a website, but some of the stuff that you
Wait, are you saying lawyers don't use websites? You
no,
use Reddit.
I'm saying they're more likely. I don't know. When I hear things like this, I'm thinking a lawyer's not going to say that. You know what I mean? But all right, I get it.
Yeah. So and here's a comment
You know
here,
what
and
it
I
is?
think
This is giving me flashbacks to some clients. Every lawyer will have a story about this where a client who's not a lawyer, right, will come to you and be like, I've got a case. It's a clear cut case. It's open and shut. And
right, right,
you're like, no, it's much more complicated than you think it is, which is why you need
right,
more. You know what I mean? It's not a clear cut, open and shut case. And
right.
it happens every single time too, like where you go into a court, um, you'll be fighting your client's position, right, to the death. It's a hardcore court battle here, and you do very well. But the other side, or your clients will come out of it saying, "How come the judge didn't immediately bang the gavel and throw the other side out of court, and throw them in jail for even having the guts to challenge us? Like it was such an open and shut case. Why is the judge
Right.
even deliberating on this? This is so easy. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like no, it's not easy. If it was easy, you would do it. So it's just what I mean. It's so when you hear things like that, like it's so open and shut, you cringe a
Are
little
you
bit.
triggered? Are you triggered,
Yeah,
Mike? Is that what this?
yeah, it makes you cringe a little bit as a lawyer. With that said, this is one of those cases where it kind of should be. You know what I mean? Now we talked about there are avenues that they can go down to try.
Yeah, interpreting that specific clause.
Right, right, and so there is room there, whether we like it or not. There is
Right.
room for the court to manipulate that language and that law.
Right.
And so,
Right. And I made sure to put that in there to
yeah,
try to give to give a little bit more context.
yeah.
That there are exceptions and there have been exceptions like with diplomats, etc.
Right, right. Now, even with all that being the case, the law up until now and how it's been interpreted all this time has been
Right,
for anyone born in the US to be a citizen, generally speaking, right? Again, there are exceptions, but
right,
it doesn't matter. The exceptions aren't the uh, immigration status of your parents, right?
right,
That has never come into play, and there's been
right,
law, cases standing for that, right? And so if a
right,
Supreme Court were to uphold this action, they would be reversing what the current
right,
constitutional law is. With that said, there is still areas that they can play around with, and so
right.
I would still be careful before calling it an open and shut case. It's again, nothing is ever that black and white, and it is the Supreme Court we're talking about, and that cynicism is well founded.
Right. One of the comments here, and this is, I think we might have touched on this in our discussion of it. Um, and they say if undocumented immigrants were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, that would allow the interpretation that their children are not citizens by birthright. But it would also mean that undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of any U.S. law enforcement, and they could break any law and every law with impunity. You can't
Yeah,
have it both ways.
but see, that's not really the case. That okay,
Right,
that would be the case if you're going to treat them as diplomats, right? Because
right,
that's where the subject to the jurisdiction language really comes from, right? Diplomat.
right,
And so if you're going to say, well, we're going to treat undocumented immigrants the same way we do diplomats, then yeah, but that's not what they're getting at. They're
right,
saying that they're not subject to the laws, meaning they can be deported, right? That's really what the whole idea of this is. They can be deported. And so they would be subject to the laws of their own country. They can stand trial in their own country, but
right,
we're not going to, according to this, treat them the way we would a citizen and or a lawful resident or whatever, and consider them subject to our laws. We're considering them subject to their home country's laws, even though their home country is the U.S. But they're saying with this
right.
order that it's no longer the U.S. Right? But
Yeah,
it isn't taking the extra step of giving them diplomatic immunity though.
right. So, like for example, a diplomat, someone with diplomatic immunity, if they committed a crime on U.S. soil, they wouldn't necessarily automatically be subject to our laws. Now, a tourist coming to the U.S.
Yeah,
committing a crime on U.S. soil would be arrested and subject to those crimes,
yeah,
to those
exactly.
laws.
Yeah, exactly. And well, right, well, if a tourist who is not a U.S. citizen. So you're saying that they're a tourist visiting the U.S. from another country, and
Yes.
yeah, so you would send them ordinarily if they committed a crime here, they'd be sent back to their country.
Well, they would be arrested first.
They'd be arrested, but I don't think in
I
most
don't think
cases.
they would be immediately deported. I think they would
Oh
serve
no, no,
some
no.
time
They
here.
go through the process. It's still due process,
Yeah.
right? But my understanding, and I don't practice criminal law, but my understanding is you don't put them in prisons in the U.S. You would deport them back to their country at that point.
I thought they would serve time here first and then be deported.
I think if anything, they might serve time in jail while they're awaiting their trial, and that could take a long time. But if you're actually going to
Mm.
convict them, if you convict someone who's from another country, don't you normally
Right.
report them out? Because that's what happens.
Um, I thought they would, yeah, I guess we're both unclear about this part of it, but I thought they would serve their time here and then be deported.
But see, I think that's the again subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. If they're not subject to our jurisdiction, how do we have the ability to punish them via the
Right.
justice system?
Yeah. So, um, that may be one to ask maybe a criminal attorney, or we can ask AI.
Yeah.
Um, let me see. I'm going to ask this here. Uh, would they serve their sentence? And I'm asking Gemini.
Okay.
Um, uh, um, let's see here. And Gemini says it depends on the severity of the crime. For minor crimes, the tourist may be deported immediately upon conviction. For more serious crimes, the tourist may be required to serve their sentence in the U.S. before being deported. Um, and that determination's made by the U.S. government and based on a number of factors, um, including the severity, the criminal history, and the tourist ties to the U.S. So I
Right.
guess there's a situation where both could be the case.
It's situational then.
Yeah, yeah. So that makes sense. You know, I think if a tourist commits murder here, they're not going to just deport them. They're going to probably want to put them to serve time.
Well, and the thing also is if you're a tourist, it depends. So you're saying under this example that they got a tourist visa or whatever, right?
Yeah,
They're basically agreeing to subject themselves to our country's laws while they're here. Now,
right, right, right.
what if they're
Well, the thing is, not all countries need to. So people coming from Japan don't have to get a specific tourist visa.
okay? But I think it's still technically considered a visa when you come in through customs and they sign your passport or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's
So,
still a visa. It's just permission to be in the country for that temporary period.
right, right. So,
Yeah, but if you're not though, like if you don't go through those channels at all, right? Let's say you just sneak in across the border or whatever.
right,
You're a foreign national, right? You're not agreeing to subject yourself to the U.S. laws. I mean, I guess an argument could be made that just by your mere presence you are, but
right,
right, I think that's why usually you just end up deporting people like that back to their country because they weren't part of our system in the first place.
right.